Because everybody wants to talk about Gunnar Henderson. He is that new star. He's like the Bryce Harper, even though he just turned 23. So he kind of is on that trajectory to be so young and have all these accomplishments and just be really talented and good. And that's why he's getting that attention.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of the Cool Sports Network. I am your host, Chase Coburn, and today I am joined once again by a very special guest, a radio reporter for WBAL and 98 Rock, Valerie Preactor. Valerie, welcome back.
Hey Chase, what's going on?
Nothing much. It's amazing to have you back on. Last time when we talked, it was January, it was in the winter, where we all thought the Ravens are going to win the Super Bowl. What a great time that was. But now we're in the summer and we're past the halfway point near the All-Star break of the MLB season. So we have a lot to break down. Why don't I start off? What's changed since January? Have you worked on any cool projects or anything? Has anything really changed since I last met with you?
Well, it was really exciting. I got to go to spring training, which was my first spring training down in Sarasota with the Orioles. So I got to spend the day there, which is good because I didn't get to do that last year. And that's really the bridge between seeing them for the last time, in October after a loss. I didn't even get to see them because they were on the road in Texas when they lost in the ALDS. So, and that's a bummer. You don't ever want to go out on such a harsh note like that. And it's so melancholy. And so to see them in the spring is a little bit of that bridge. And then I get to see them for opening day, which was really exciting. So spring training was definitely different for me. And I had never been down there in their Sarasota facility, which is gorgeous. It's the second coming of Camden Yards. So that was really fun. And obviously the Ravens lost in the AFC Championship game, but just having an AFC Championship game in Baltimore was so exciting. There was a tinge of doubt, I want to say, like going into it. I was really nervous and obviously proved to be right. So, the Ravens will have a lot to work on, and they've changed a lot of things this offseason for better, for worse, whether it was forced or, other people's decisions to leave and take better opportunities. So we're going into the Ravens season with a whole new outlook, I think. Goal stays the same, but I'm interested to see these guys in training camp, which is coming up in a couple weeks.
Yes, it'll be amazing. And I think that's a great part about having baseball and football in Baltimore is it just never stops.
Mm-hmm.
It keeps going, which is awesome. I actually want to touch on that point, though. I got to talk to Evan Washburn last week, and he was mentioning how, because he covered that AFC Championship game, just for the city alone to have the AFC Championship game was amazing, but unfortunately they couldn't get it done. You mentioned spring training. How chaotic was it? Like Corbin Burns and David Rubenstein kind of come in last minute, and then spring training starts, and then you're like there, and you're under new management, and you got a brand new ace. How did that whole thing work?
Yeah, it was crazy, actually, because I feel like all of that news dropped in the span of just a couple of weeks, if not like 1 week. And that's usually a time where, it's a down sports time. It's the in-between, even though there's no off season for us, because we're constantly talking about these two teams doing something, and that's exactly what happened. So with Corbin Burns and that whole trade, it didn't catch anybody by surprise, but it ended up being such a good move by Mike Elias that it has worked out so well in their favor. I ask every media person that I bring on to my pregame show for the Orioles, whether they're a national reporter or whatever, I always ask them, like, is he the best addition to this team in the offseason? And the answer is yes. I mean, other than, the return on investment from Ryan O'Hearn, but we saw that last year from him. It's a huge difference between who they had last year as their starting ace, who was Kyle Gibson, who I don't know if you consider him an ace last year. He's just a guy that eats innings. He's that veteran presence. Corbin Burns is a bona fide ace. That's what they look like. And he's completely changed, I think, the starting rotation for the Orioles. He's the only one that's been able to remain healthy. Fingers crossed he doesn't miss a start. Hasn't yet, even though his wife just gave birth to twins earlier this week. So he's set to go. He is on track to make his, fourth All-Star game, it seems like. And maybe Grayson Rodriguez is in that conversation too. So all hail Mike Elias at this point, the offseason. And then I think, like you said, David Rubenstein taking over the ownership group, that's completely changed the entire atmosphere in Baltimore, in Camden Yards. We're finally seeing fans coming back, even for weekday games, which, yes, we were seeing them come back in droves for promotion nights on the weekends or day games, but we're finally seeing them during the week show up to the ballpark, and he's promoting having fun, and that's what everyone's doing.
It really is amazing. And just watching, I found my way to Camden Yards a few times already this year. And I mean, you can completely tell you're 100% right. The atmosphere has completely changed. And I want to touch on a point. You said that Corbin Burns was the biggest change. One of the things that I think has been the biggest change from last year's team to this year's team that I don't really think a lot of people touch on, Gunnar Henderson was not playing good baseball at all in April and May last year. And I think many people forget that, considering he ended up winning AL Rookie of the Year unanimously. So this time, a calendar year ago, we were looking like, is Gunnar Henderson going to go back to AAA? And now a calendar year later, and he's one of the front runners for MVP. As from a reporter's view, how has he been able to make that jump?
It's been quiet, at the beginning, it was all of a sudden Gunnar Henderson's back to where we thought he was. Like that very first, I'll never forget it, his debut at the end of August in Cleveland, first hit home run. Like you remember that scene. And that was the Gunnar Henderson that we were expecting. And then when we kind of saw not a sophomore slump because it was his rookie year, but just second stint in the big leagues, not working out, just tough at bats. And I always like to say, like, when you look back on it, it's not like he was really failing. He was still getting on base. Like he was finding ways to make a difference, but it just wasn't as loud and it wasn't as talked about as it is now, where he has these ridiculous on base streaks. And, the defense has been incredible too. So you have to give that to him. I think it's been a slow progression. I mean, you talk to any of those guys, they work with the hitting coaches constantly. Everyone goes through an offensive slump. It's too long of a season to not have several of them, especially when they've had really a tough schedule so far this season. It's about to get a little bit easier in the second half. But I don't know if that's going to be proved to be better. So with Gunnar, though, at the end of the season, it wasn't a surprise. We knew he was going to be the Rookie of the Year. Obviously, with Corbin Carroll, it was kind of always a question because they went further into the postseason to the World Series, but you can't count that when you're just talking about the regular season. So also totally different defensive skills too. Right. So you're seeing a lot more of Gunnar Henderson in the infield at shortstop than you are in the outfield with Corbin Carroll. And Corbin Carroll's had a serious sophomore slump this year. So can't say the same really for Gunnar Henderson. He is just rolling.
He's amazing. He really is.
So Gunnar Henderson's been, of course, you talk about adding him and Adley Rutschman in the same draft. It's unreal to think about.
It really is. And I think a lot of people, at least when I was following the Orioles back in 2022, it was always kind of like Gunnar was always second to Adley. I don't know why. I get, Adley came up first. Adley was the number one prospect first. It was always like Gunnar was like Adley's little brother in a sense, drafted later. And then all of a sudden he's just made this jump. And it's great, even though it was a horrible loss on Sunday Night Baseball the other night. But just to see him like mic'd up and like you could just tell every time they have a national televised game, all eyes are on Gunnar Henderson. And it's amazing that I think the Orioles have finally found that blossom star.
It's so true. And exactly what you're saying is right, because although Adley Rutschman himself is having an MVP year, nobody's talking about it because everybody wants to talk about Gunnar Henderson. He is that new star. He's like the Bryce Harper, even though he just turned 23. So he kind of is on that trajectory to be so young and have all these accomplishments and just be really talented and good. And that's why he's getting that attention. Not to say that Adley Rutschman's not just as talented. The reason why I feel like it's flipped in the past year or so is that when Adley came up, that was the first chip to fall. Everybody was waiting for Adley Rutschman. He's the 1-1 pick. He's going to be their saving grace. And he was. So for him to come up first, and I still say, like, I wish that they hadn't brought him up then. But look, we wouldn't have the seasons that we've been having the last couple of years if he didn't come up in May of 2022. So I think everyone's debut has come at a real timely opportunity. And even you look at Jordan Westberg, who's really made a difference this year, and Colton Cowser as well. They've just timed it perfectly. They have. So I really can't say anything. Their scouting has been incredible. The way that they're running the front office is proving to work. So everybody loves that. But no, you're right. Adley's taken a little bit of the back burner this year, which I think he probably likes. And that lets him really lock in and focus on what he wants to get done and reach those goals of, like hitting 300 and getting 30 home runs and whatever. We're going to see that from Gunnar Henderson. There's no doubt. But you could also see it from Adley Rutschman, so don't count him out.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, having both of them, having the debate of who's better, I think it's a great debate to have. But focusing more on kind of like the present, you're talking about Adley, more of a quiet guy, and maybe he's happy to kind of be that second guy. I talked to Jerry Coleman and Melissa Kim, other local Baltimore reporters, and they said that they felt the quote unquote leaders of the Orioles and Ravens were Gunnar Henderson and Roquan Smith, and that could be a player or a coach. And they said they felt that inside the locker room, those were the guys that the players listened to. As another reporter and yourself, do you agree with those answers? Or if so, why are they valid? Or if not, kind of like, what's your answer to that? Who is the leader in those locker rooms?
For the Ravens, there's no doubt it is Roquan Smith. He has been pegged as bringing that Ray Lewis juice. That's what Lamar Jackson said, and it's 100% true. He is so well-spoken. He is so determined and motivated that he's like a preacher. He is going to motivate you like spiritually within the entire locker room. He just has that, essence about him. Gunnar Henderson, I might disagree with you there, because as much as he leads by example because of the way that he's playing, I don't know that he's the most vocal in the clubhouse. I think you really have to give it to, again, another veteran in that clubhouse. And I think Cole Irvin is a really good one to put that on. He's been there 2 years now. But also a guy like Anthony Santander, who talks to everybody. Anyone that I've heard, they listen to Santander. They're hearing stories from Santander. Or you could also put up the three guys who have really lived through this rebuild: Ryan Mountcastle, Cedric Mullins, Austin Hayes. I mean, maybe it's Cedric Mullins through and through. That guy can be a quiet leader, but I mean, he can get those guys right and have a motivational speech. There's no doubt, because they've been through it. I mean, Ryan Mountcastle is the character in the group, honestly, but I think that all of those guys know where this team has been and are so passionate to get them to where they want to be and be a part of it, that they're motivating those guys. They're the leaders, the speakers in the group, more so than Gunnar Henderson, because again, he's still learning. Like, guys are motivated by him based on how he's playing. It's a contagious offensive pursuit, but I think it's more of the veteran guys that are really teaching everybody else.
Interesting. Yeah, I think Santander may be a great answer. Or Mullins. I think the thing with Cedric Mullins that I love is, like, he could be batting 180, but yet what he does on the field, like when you look at the big moments this year against, what was it, Minnesota and New York, and like Cedric Mullins is always making an impact. That's what I love about him, is like, again, literally he could be batting 180, but he's still going to make an impact. And that's why I think Brandon Hyde has stuck with him. And that's another thing I love with Brandon Hyde. You look at the cold slumps this year, a lot of people forget the first 3 weeks Gunnar was batting like 220. I mean, obviously you keep him in there, but even other guys, like he's sticking with Colton Cowser, and I think that's going to work in the long run. He's stuck with Austin Hayes. He's now up to 250 now. And I think he's, batting better. Same thing with Cedric Mullins. I really love that Brandon Hyde sticks with these guys.
Let me tell you something about Brandon Hyde. He is one of the most intellectual managers I've ever been very honored to cover. And he and John Harbaugh, they go hand in hand. The culture that is in these locker rooms is so unmatched. And that stems from the coach. It stems from the manager. The way that he handles business is truly incredible. And I've had this conversation with a couple coaches from the inside, because everybody looks up to Brandon Hyde, but he also asks for everyone's opinion. He wants everyone to succeed, and a lot falls on his shoulders. So people get mad at Brandon Hyde when they take Kyle Bradish out after pitching, 5 perfect innings. Okay, well, look what happened to Kyle Bradish. Would you have wanted him to stay in there? It's the hindsight that you're not understanding as a fan, and what Brandon Hyde is thinking even then, So even look back to Jackson Holiday. How long they stuck with Jackson Holiday? 34 bats. Doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're not doing anything, it is a lot. That's a lot of at bats you could get back and have hits and have home runs and have anything. I mean, the kid really tried hard, and I think they stuck with him for a perfect amount of time. And now that he's back in AAA again, you're going to hear that word confidence go with him for the rest of the year, because we can't wait to see it. And we know that it's there. But I think they did him well in having him up here, getting that experience for the perfect amount of time while the team was still winning. And I think that's the most important part about it. Brandon Hyde didn't suffer in those at-bats. They still won those games. It wasn't Jackson Holiday costing them losses. And I think that just proves to you that Brandon Hyde has a lot of trust in these players, and he wants them to succeed, right, just as much as he does.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned John Harbaugh and the culture he creates. Let's run across the street to M&T Bank. Let's talk about the Ravens for a second because, last time we talked, I didn't want to say it then, and obviously there's a reason why I didn't. I did not think there was going to be anyone to touch Baltimore at that moment. When you just look at the way they were dominating, and not only that they were dominating, but again, the way that they did it, this style of like, we are going to run into you, we're going to hit harder than anyone else in the league. We have guys that can run faster than anyone else in this league. And I just thought there's no way this team doesn't win. But you mentioned the culture that John Harbaugh creates. He's gotten a lot of criticism for, some of the dancing in the locker room, on New Year's and some of the Texans games and, not running the football. Some people blame Lamar in that AFC Championship game. Some people blame Zay Flowers. What was the problem? And, because a lot of people want to say, is it the same problem that was in the previous postseasons, or was there something specific this year that was the reason they lost to Kansas City?
That's a good question when you talk about previous playoff experiences. And I want to start with John Harbaugh because it's the same comparison that people are making with David Rubenstein and having too much fun. As you're having too much fun for your age or for your role or for this, for that. They're having fun and you're not. So I don't want to hear it. That's what makes a good culture. That's what makes a good group. That's why these teams are so close and they're so passionate about not only their sport, but about their community, about the city. They're rallying around Baltimore, and they want to do this not only for themselves, like I keep saying, but for the city, for the fans. They know they deserve this too. So John Harbaugh is just trying to get these guys excited. He's trying to get everybody across Baltimore excited about what they've accomplished, because you still can't discredit the season that they had, regardless of how it ended. Now, I always say that in this particular circumstance, when you look back at this season, when they faced off in the divisional round with the Texans, they had already seen the Texans in week 1, but they were a completely different Texans team. But they still knew their system, their scheme, had that background information. When you face the Chiefs for the very first time and it's postseason Patrick Mahomes, I don't blame him. That is a different beast. It would have been so nice if the Ravens had faced the Chiefs in the first 5 weeks where they were scuffling. Even when they were doing bad, you still get familiar with that other team because everyone thought, the Chiefs are done after week 5. Forget it. There's injuries. Nobody's playing. They don't have Tyreek Hill, blah, blah, blah.
Even at Christmas when Kelsey's, slamming down the helmet, Mahomes those pick six against Raiders, you could not have told me in a million years that Kansas City was going to go back to back at that moment.
So I think the issues this year, like you're saying, not running the ball, that's a Lamar Jackson issue. It's a Todd Monken issue. I'm not going to fault Zay Flowers. Look, it's his very first playoff game or playoff season. That's a rookie move. But I don't blame him because it's aggressive in the moment. The energy is so high. You're grasping at straws, trying to get anything going for your offense. I give him a lot of credit, and he didn't deserve all of the backlash that came off of that, because that's like any rookie getting, having a hard play like that. It didn't cost them the game. They already lost. That wasn't really, you know what I mean? Even if that was going to be a touchdown or whatever it was going to be, there's still work to be done. There was still more game to play. So I'm not going to throw that on the shoulders of Zay Flowers. And you know what? In the moment, I didn't get to talk to him, and I just wanted to say, I saw another quote from a player that something similar had happened throughout the season. And he had said something, I don't even remember what team it was, but the quote just stood out to me. He's like, I'm just going to go home and call my mom because she's the only one that loves me right now.
I think it was that Colts play at the end of the game when the Colts guy dropped the ball and the Texans won the division. I think it was that, yeah.
And the same thing, you look at the Bills kicker, come on. It all comes down to one play. Of course it doesn't. This is a team game. So I just felt so bad for these guys in the moment. They had so many aspirations. Vegas was right on the tip of their tongues, and you just can't get there all the time. And so hopefully this is going to fuel their fire going into this season, but it's a very different Ravens team this year.
Right. And all I know is it fuels my fire as a fan, because Mike Greenberg brought up a good point the week after. He said, I know it sounds funny, but if aliens came from Mars right now and they watched their first football game, it's clear and obvious who the better football team was, and that was Baltimore. But for them in that AFC Championship game, but for them to lose in the playoffs, and it's happened throughout every time, everything has to go wrong and everything does go wrong. I feel like once there's one disconnect, it's like a tree and everything starts to disconnect. It goes from John, I think, to the offensive coordinator, then to Lamar, and then some of his other players. And, people look at, the defense only allowed 17 points. Mahomes did start 13 for 13, and they came up with that 3rd and 10 to end the game. So they kind of came up with the important plays, Kansas City. So I don't know what it is, but to me, for Ravens to lose, everything has to go wrong. And that disconnect always starts somewhere, and it just goes everywhere, and everything does go wrong.
Yeah, it is worst case scenario. And remember, they did shut out Patrick Mahomes in the second half. They had a shot to make up the ground, and they just couldn't do it. And I think at the end of the day, you can put blame anywhere you want, but they just have to be better. They have to game plan better. They knew what they were coming in to face, and they're doing it at home, in Baltimore for the first time in, since 1970. So it's pretty disappointing the way things ended. But compared to other years, I don't know if they were ready in other years, but this year in 2023, getting into 2024, they had health on their side, especially for Lamar. And I think that's been the biggest difference. And even though they didn't have Mark Andrews and they brought him back in that AFC Championship game, which they didn't need him, it felt like a really complete team. And you're right. They did seem like the best team in the league.
Yeah. I have a question. Do you think it is Lamar? Because I don't mean to sound like the Stephen A. Smith of this guy can win the playoffs. He is still 27. He's had 6 years in the league. He's had really like those 2 seasons where he's won MVP and come short. But do you think it's a Lamar problem?
When you look at other quarterbacks in the NFL, not everybody's a Tom Brady. Not everybody's a Patrick Mahomes. Sometimes it takes them a couple of years to get those wins. Look at Peyton Manning. Look at Drew Brees, who only won 1 Super Bowl. Aaron Rodgers has only won 1 Super Bowl. Yes, they have more playoff wins, but those playoff wins really don't matter unless you're winning the Super Bowl, in a lot of people's opinions. So to say that it's all on Lamar, yes, he's the leader of this team. He's the quarterback. He's the workhorse. He's not necessarily the one that's calling the plays. So it's half up to him. It's half up to the offensive coordinator, and that's changed over the years, obviously, going from Greg Roman to now Todd Monken, who I think has been an incredible difference maker. And I can't wait to see what this next year brings, because there's just going to be more chemistry between the two and they're going to know each other better. But I do think you're right. There's a lot of people that look at Lamar and say, well, if he doesn't win this year, then it's over. And he hasn't done it yet. And if he doesn't, look, he gets this big contract and he still can't do it. All about the money, whatever. I mean, at the end of the day, yes, it can be Lamar, because he's the one that has to make the plays. He's the one that has to win the game with the rest of his team. He's the facilitator. If he's not facilitating and it's not working in the playoffs, but it's working in the regular season, there's a disconnect there. We got to figure out what it is and then see if you can actually fix it to make it work. They haven't found that solution yet. So we're getting one step closer, and you have to say that there was progress this year. For them to make it to the AFC Championship game for the first time since 2011, that's definitely progress with Lamar, for sure. Getting to the Super Bowl this year, that's the next challenge. Can they do it?
Right. Let's head our way over back to the Orioles. And it's hard. We got to juggle 2 teams here that are contending for championships. We got to go back and forth here. But one of the biggest problems, you mentioned health on Baltimore side, on the Ravens side. Health has not been great on the Orioles side. Kyle Bradish, John Means, Tyler Wells, all out for the season. Many are saying the Orioles should target a reliever, but mainly a starter at the deadline to kind of be that, Cole Irvin showed some signs, Albert Suarez some signs, Cade Povich has played well, but maybe not well enough. They need to find that third pitcher behind Rodriguez and Burns. Do you feel the Orioles should target a pitcher like that? And if so, who do you think could be a realistic option? Even a better question, who is Baltimore, you think, okay with giving up to make those trades?
Right. That's the better question. Who are they going to give up? Because you look at the slew of prospects that they have I hate to say it, but wasting away in AAA, because Kobe Mayo's down there with a 980 OPS. Like, what on earth is that kid not doing in the majors right now? And there's just nowhere to put him. So for me, and this is my opinion, I know that the Orioles are talking to other teams. The problem is, are they going to get a good enough deal where they think they're getting the best available pitcher from another team. A lot of people are throwing out maybe the White Sox are going to be sellers, maybe the Athletics, wherever Mason Miller is going to go, blah, blah, blah. I think realistically, they do need to target a starter, and they do need to target a reliever, because look at what they've been able to accomplish, though, this season without those 3 starters, already without Felix Bautista, and not having the best pitching outings always. From
Right.
Craig Kimbrell, who went through a little bit of a slump, still, trying to get back to where he was when he first started. Like you said, Cole Irvin. I mean, Albert Suarez has been a godsend, and all of a sudden he's got 1 or 2 bad outings, and well, you can't really put him anywhere else because you still need him as a starter.
Right.
So again, this is also when you look at the offense without Cedric Mullins hitting, without Austin Hayes hitting, Jorge Mateo finally figuring it out. It's been the young guys. It's been Grayson Rodriguez. And Corbin Burns has been the only pitcher that hasn't been injured, knock on wood. He's
don't even say anything, please.
He's so solid in his process. I mean, he's really been incredible. But I do think that they need to seriously think about bringing in another starter, because you don't even know if this is just a loan for Corbin Burns. Is the next person going to just be a loan? But who you're gonna give up? You gave up DL Hall and Joey Ortiz. Probably the best thing that's ever happened to them. Joey Ortiz maybe in National League Rookie of the Year conversation. DL Hall's been struggling a little bit, but he wasn't gonna be a big starter or a confident reliever here in Baltimore. It just wasn't formulating.
Right.
So I think that was really a great trade. There's a lot of untouchables in the prospect group. You look at maybe Samuel Basayo, you look at Jackson Holliday, you look at Kobe Mayo, probably untouchable, all 3 of them. There's so many others, though. Connor Norby, up and down. He's been up here once, hit a home run in his first for his first hit, but he hasn't been back since. There's really nowhere to put him. It's so hard when you look at this infield, and what about Heston Kjerstad? He's done well too. What about Kyle Stowers, who is way too old to be hitting in the minor leagues right now? I think Kyle Stowers is a name that could be on the block come the trade deadline at the end of this month, because he's such a strong hitter. And again, there's just you don't need that many outfielders. So I think it's him or Heston Kjerstad. Or is Colton Cowser on the list? I hate to say that, because I think that he fits so well into this group as it is. And the fact that he's stayed up here this entire season, even though he's gone through his slumps, he could be a name that's on the list because he's younger. What about the older guys, though? That's my real question. Do you need the Ramon Arias? Do you need the Austin Hayes? I feel like
they have value. That's the problem. Do they have value?
Right. They have value here because they've been through it. But they could easily be another clubhouse guy anywhere else. And so, especially, I look to Ramon Arias. There's just too many infielders. You got to keep Jorge Mateo because of his speed. I don't know that you need Ramon Arias. He's already has slim at bats as it is. He is helpful. He's consistent. He's a veteran. But I think he's a Gold Glover. He deserves to be a starting third baseman, and he's not. If you've got Jordan Westburg and on the run, up back to the big leagues is Connor Norby and Jackson Holliday. You can't have all of them. So I think a number of those guys are on the list. I can't tell you exactly from what other teams they could be plucking from, but my other idea is they could make 0 moves, and I think they could be fine.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you bring up Chase McDermott, he could turn into that starter. I mean, there are ways to work it. To me, my problem is, for me, Mayo and or Norby has to go. And the reason why I say that, and again, Kobe Mayo has been amazing. But at the same time, if I'm looking at the Orioles infield right now, Jordan Westburg or Jackson Holliday is playing second or third base, right? They're going to alternate between that. However, Brandon Hyde would like to play that. I'd probably put Holliday at second, Westburg at third. However he wants to play that. Gunner's playing shortstop. Okay, there's the infield, because I don't think you're going to have Mayo play first base. So where's the room for Kobe Mayo or Connor Norby? I guess that's the problem.
It's a great point.
No, and again, you may say, okay, move one of them to the outfield. Who are you taking out in the outfield right now? Because the Orioles want to re-sign Anthony Santander. And actually, that's a great segue into my next question. Are the Orioles going to re-sign their impending free agents? Is Corbin Burns coming back next year? Is Anthony Santander coming back? Is there a reasonable price range? What do you think?
Yeah, I want to say yes to both of them. But again, that outfield is so stacked. But Anthony Santander is one of those like franchise players that came up in the big leagues when, they still had Trey Mancini, when they still had, Mark Trumbo and
Oh
it was
my gosh.
such a different look. And you don't remember that. You don't realize how quote unquote old he is because he's not old. He's just like maybe 26. But he's been in the conversation with the Orioles for so long.
Right.
And I think he's just now starting to reach his prime. Like it's been getting there and getting there for the past like 2 seasons. And we've known that he's got that power. And I think this year, with him hitting 13 home runs in a single month grind, I mean, that's incredible. That's stuff that you haven't seen since who was the last guy? Nelson Cruz in 2014.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Frank Robinson before that. I mean,
Right.
yeah.
It's unreal names on that list. So I think for Anthony Santander, I think there could be a very reasonable price to keep him here. Corbin Burns is definitely going to be asking for a lot more because, again, he goes to his 4th straight All-Star. If he's in the Cy Young conversation again this year, that's hiking the number up higher and higher and higher. I think they should extend him. I was a little surprised they let Kyle Gibson go, but he's even older than Corbin Burns. So, and not at the same caliber. So Corbin Burns is totally in his prime right now, as is Anthony Santander. I wish they would re-sign them both. I think they need a long-term veteran pitcher to go hand in hand with Grayson Rodriguez, who's your other second ace who was groomed in the organization. You're not going to get another guy like that because you're bringing in a veteran from another team. So unless they make a deal at the trade deadline and that's the person, that's the starter that's going to stay a long term and it's not going to be Corbin Burns, it's also going to depend on what they do this year. Like if they get to the World Series and, even in the playoffs, Corbin Burns is your number 1 starter. I mean, he's
Oh my
day.
gosh. Yeah.
And then it's Grayson. Even though we saw Grayson last season, which I didn't think was the greatest idea, but again, he needed that experience. So I get it in hindsight. Again, he could be your number 2 starter. So that's your tandem. You definitely need a third guy in there. I mean, Dean Kramer was him. Kyle Bradish was him. But you're not going to get Kyle Bradish back, for a long time. So you got to get a reincarnation of him. And I hope those long-term deals come for Adley and Gunnar too. You got to lock everybody up. It's just a matter of time. And they have time with those guys. I know a lot of people are calling for them right now, but they've got them through like 2027. So like they're not going to worry about it unless they really want to stuff their pockets right now.
Right. And the Kyle Bradish injury really hurts, right? John Means, Tyler Wells, they're okay pitchers.
I know.
Means I've accepted that he's not going to play 5 straight games without an injury again. So as sad as it is to say,
so true.
Kyle Bradish hurts because he was pitching so well. And I actually thought there was an argument going into the season and maybe even for the future as well, like going into next season, had he not got hurt, that you could say Kyle Bradish has an argument to be the Orioles ace as opposed to Corbin Burns to kind of be that number 1 guy. I think that's going to raise Burns' price, and I think it's going to make the Orioles have to re-sign him too. As bad as it is, I think Burns is going to use that as leverage, right? If they had Kyle Bradish and he was now this more, he'd been there for a few years, very good pitcher coming in next year, he may not play next year. So if the Orioles want to, really contend for the future as well, and especially for these next few seasons, Corbin Burns is going to be like, you need me. And I don't think the Orioles are going to have a choice. And I think, as much as I hate to say it, I love Tony Taters. I think he's going to have to go because I just don't think there's going to be salary room for him when you look at the other guys that have to extend. And I think the Orioles are going to have to think about that at the trade deadline at the end of this month, because you got to say, okay, who do you want as your future outfield? Austin Hayes does not appear to be that guy. But if you have Colton Cowser or Heston Kjerstad, you move Kobe Mayo to the outfield or Connor Norby. Like, how do you play this outfield? The Orioles are going to have to decide that soon, and I think the Orioles will probably know by the end of this month whether they're going to re-sign Santander or not, just for their future.
You're right, and I see there being a world in Birdland without Anthony Santander. I totally do, and I honestly think I felt that way before he had this season that he's having right now, even then. So maybe they're going to surprise us. And we'll see what happens at the trade deadline because they're going to wait until the last minute to make any decisions. But I do think that they're going to have to trade somebody with a lot of leverage, somebody that's really going to be a difference maker on another team, whether that's a struggling team or someone just looking to boost, their clubhouse morale, roster, whatever it may be. And it really could be anybody. Like I said, there's obviously untouchables, even in the majors. But no, you're right, because the infield and outfield, as we see it now, it could look totally different and it would still be just as good. That's the truth.
100%. All right, we got to head back to the Ravens before we kind of wrap up this episode. We make our predictions. They added a guy, I think you're probably familiar, Derrick Henry, top two in rushing for the last 5 years. The only year he got hurt, and he was leading the league in rushing by like 200 yards. Point is, the guy is very, very good at running the football, and now he's added into Lamar Jackson. God bless any linebacker trying to guard that on the read option. But, a lot of people are saying, does this move the needle for Baltimore, a team that was already, a great rushing offense? Does that move the needle? How much of an impact do you think Derrick Henry will make? And again, not to go back to the problems of not running the football in the playoffs, but do you think, because they did it against Tennessee, they did it against Kansas City, do you think they're going to be more scared to not run the football now, knowing that Derrick Henry's at halfback?
No, I think it's going to be huge because Derrick Henry is that workload running back that you are going to want to give. What do they call him? Like the cowbell running back or something?
Right.
So he's also an advocate for himself. He's going to go out there and be like, give me the ball. He's that type of personality where I feel as though Gus Edwards isn't saying that. You know what I mean? Like it's not.
Very funny because literally what you just said there, my dad literally mentioned to me when we were talking about the Ravens a few days ago, literally that Henry will say, I want the ball, and Edwards won't. It's a fair point.
Which Gus Edwards is a great running back, but that's just his demeanor. He's, if you want him there, he'll be there and he'll do whatever you ask him. But I don't think he's really going to insert himself into that conversation or into that play if it's not already drawn up that way. Derrick Henry is going to say, give me the ball. We're going to go win the game. That's the type of energy that you need from him too. And the biggest deal is that Lamar Jackson has led this team in rushing the last couple of years, which is disappointing in itself. So I think this could be the year where a running back actually leads in rushing yards because they're going to give Derrick Henry the ball a lot, as they should, and he wants it too. So just feed that. He's hungry enough. And I think he's excited to do it against those other teams in purple and black. And so this could solve a lot of their problems at rushing, because you look at the past years, again, they dealt with that platoon role of Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, and then J.K. Dobbins just can't stay healthy. So then you've got Gus Edwards and then Keaton Mitchell.
Classic. Great player who can't stay healthy.
Right. Exactly. And then you look at Keaton Mitchell and you hope that that's just not his future. So, you're going to get Keaton Mitchell back at some point too, and he's a completely different runner than Derrick Henry. He's not a bulldozer. He'll just get by you. So it's a little bit different, and I think the juxtaposition between those two is going to work out so well if Keaton Mitchell comes back 100% mid-season, which is exactly when they need him. And it's kind of the same thing with the Ravens as it is with the Orioles. Yes, you want to be good coming out of the gate. You want to show everybody that you can go far, you can do it. But obviously, you have to win enough games to get into the playoffs. But you don't have to win the division. You don't have to get home field advantage. It's great, but you can still, we saw this last year in the World Series, make the wild card and just go on a tear. And that is, I think, what the Orioles could do if they get Keaton Mitchell back and Derrick Henry's still healthy, which he's done so well in his entire career, getting into the 30s. And I know everybody gets a little scared when you bring up that number, but he does. He keeps his body so well and so fit and just ready for anything that I don't think anything's going to surprise him. And he's just going to fit right into this group and make it that much better.
Right. And I cannot wait until Keaton Mitchell comes back, if he does, because if he can come back midseason next year, you're right. That is really the perfect time when Baltimore's going to need him, because I actually think that will open up an area where I think Lamar's going to have to do much more passing than you think, because teams are going to go back to okay, let's stack the box. You got to worry about Derrick Henry. Lamar's going to pass the ball a lot, I think, in the first half of the season. If Keaton Mitchell comes back, now you're going to have to worry about Mitchell and Henry, and Lamar's going to be like, okay, I'll just run over here. So I think those three, it's going to be a really dynamic trio.
And I'll tell you something, Chase. At the beginning of the season last year with the Ravens, I was really on Lamar Jackson for not having a successful deep ball. And we didn't have the Ravens didn't have a touchdown of over 20 yards for like half the season. It was such a pet peeve of mine because I know that Lamar Jackson can have a cannon of an arm. He just wasn't finding the receivers. They were getting blocked downfield or whatever. It just wasn't working. And it was making me so frustrated because I knew that unlocks a whole nother game for Lamar Jackson. And that's why when you see him defer to the run in those RPOs, it's because his guys are blocked. It's because that secondary must be really good, whoever they're facing. But that's something that the wide receivers have to figure out. And maybe that's a Zay thing. That's a Odell Beckham Jr., really good at getting a PI, whatever. But it's the fact that Lamar's got to find those guys. And there were some of those. We finally got to see that Zay Flowers, 70-yard touchdown. I love it. That's what I want to see more of. And you're right. He's got to get more in the passing game. And I think that's what Todd Monken is going to help. Also, remember, they didn't have Mark Andrews for a real big chunk of that season. And I think that's the security blanket for Lamar Jackson always. So did Zay step in and really take over that role? Not really. And neither did Odell Beckham Jr. So I'm excited to see when you have another year of a stacked offense with Mark Andrews, you've got Derrick Henry now in the backfield. Not to mention that Mark Andrews is going off about Rashad Bateman, and a lot of people are saying he's going to have a ridiculous year. I can't wait to see it because we've been dying for Rashad Bateman to have his year. So I'm hoping that this all comes to fruition and it all works hand in hand. So we could be seeing something we've never seen before. And going back to the Keaton Mitchell, just electric. I mean, those are plays that you do not forget.
I remember every one of his touchdowns.
It's so electric. And I can't wait to see him back at full strength, at full speed. He's just got it in his blood. And so there's a lot riding on this Ravens season because there's just so many ways that they, in our minds, can win.
Right. I think you're 100% right. And something I am a little concerned about, it is great to have Mark Andrews back, but I actually think Isaiah Likely fits so well in that system.
Mm-hmm.
The only concern I have is let's not implement Mark Andrews to every tight end one play. And I know it sounds crazy. He's Mark Andrews. Isaiah Likely, I think for Baltimore to succeed, they have to utilize him because he has a strength that not a lot of people see. He's like this athletic tight end with long arms. He really does fit this Baltimore system really well. As long as he's utilized and the Ravens have all these weapons, I'm fine.
No, it's so true. And they even had Charlie Kohler get in last year for a touchdown. And that was, a Tyler Huntley situation. But remember, a lot is falling on the shoulders of Lamar Jackson.
On this situation. I'm glad those are over.
Right. Well, now that you don't have him as your backup, though, I feel like it is going to look a lot different if the Ravens get into those scenarios where they're up by a lot. They can throw in the backup quarterback. It ain't going to be Malik Cunningham anymore if he's going to be turned to a wide receiver. Right. So it's going to be Josh Johnson. What? It's going to be Devin Leary. I don't know. Maybe we'll have to see. It's going to be a much different dynamic this year behind the scenes, I think, than we're ready for.
And I think it's interesting that Baltimore has targeted quarterbacks who aren't as mobile and are more in the pocket. Maybe that's saying a lot of a possible system change. I don't know. But real quick, we've been going for now close to 43 minutes. And I think the audience is dying to hear your prediction for both teams, the Ravens and the Orioles. Take as much time as you need, but break down both in whatever order you would like. Are they getting it done? Is this the year for both teams?
So much like the Ravens, I'm going to say for the Orioles, if they make it to the ALCS, make it to that 7-game series, right, I'll be happy. I'll be really happy. And again, that shows progress. And I think if they – even if they don't win the division, which I feel like they will, I have a lot of faith that the Yankees are going to plummet at some point.
Yeah, Luis Gil, I liked him at the beginning, but he is really – it's bad.
Talk about a crazy game. That was a crazy game.
Yeah.
So again, the Orioles can beat anybody right now besides the Houston Astros. That's a different story. But
that was a disaster.
They're not really going to see him in the postseason, fingers crossed. But the teams that they would see, they've beaten. And the AL East is just not competition anymore. So you've got to look outside, the Rangers series. Look at that. Look at the Phillies. Look at the Braves. I mean, anybody that they faced on the National League side, which again, they don't face them all. They don't see them all the time. So it's a little bit unfamiliar. I do think that the Orioles make it to the ALCS. If they lose in the ALCS, I'll still be happy. I think fans will still be excited because you're still having playoff home games, no matter what.
Right.
So I think that is the coolest part about it. And of course, everyone wants to get the World Series. If they make a big splash and they add 2 new pitchers and things completely change, they could make it to the World Series. But if they don't make a big of a splash, which, I'm leaning towards they might not if they don't get the deal that they're really looking for, they could still go to the ALCS. So that's my prediction for the Orioles. For the Ravens, the plan is to get back to the AFC Championship game and win it. If they lose in the Super Bowl, I'll still be fine. But they got to get there. They have to get there. And again, it's going to start. I think they're already in a good position this year because they're facing the Chiefs first, which if it's a trend, like we saw last year with the Lions, big upset in Kansas City, week 1, start the season off right. That's a huge confidence booster. Even if they lose in that game, in that week 1 game, they still face the Chiefs. I think that's the most important team to face because they are the ones that are going for that dynasty. They're going for that 3rd straight Super Bowl. They have to face them once in the regular season, and they do it right off the bat. I don't know who else is going to be a juggernaut in the NFL right now. It's definitely going to be the Ravens, at least on the AFC side. But you look at what a lot of the other teams have lost, like the Bills.
Buffalo has lost their entire team.
Forget it. Even the AFC North, I have zero faith in the Steelers. I think
we had to get the Steelers criticism in somewhere.
I don't have a lot of faith in the Browns either. I know a lot of people want to put stock in, maybe Deshaun Watson's going to have a healthy year this year. Who do they have? I've heard nothing about what their team is made up of. I don't think they've made any really big deals, and I'll go back and look at it, but I don't think they're a competition. The only one I think is Joe Burrow. A healthy Joe Burrow. He's got Jamar Chase, period, the end. You don't need to say anything else. I mean, unless their defense sucks, which it does, but, they don't have the TJ Watt that's really thwarted the Ravens the past couple of years. Joe Burrow himself leads that team, and they can hurt the Ravens. Luckily, the Ravens have gotten the better of them most recently, but the Steelers, they're still a problem, but they're really not a problem in the postseason. So I'm not worried about those 2 losses. It doesn't make a difference. So I do think the Ravens, my prediction is they're going to make it back to the AFC Championship game if they stay healthy, which is the most important thing. And I do think they may get to the Super Bowl. But I don't know who it's going to be against because they really have to bulldoze the Chiefs at one point, whether that's week 1 or whether it's, divisional or, AFC Championship game again. But I think the Super Bowl could look very different, and I hope that it does. That's my dream.
Do you think they're going to get it, or do they have to get there? Like, what do you think? Like, if you were right now, if you're Vegas and you're in that bettors and you got to make a prediction, like, where are you landing right now for the Ravens?
It's really so unpredictable, but I think they do land. It would just be so perfect too. If they went to the Super Bowl this year in New Orleans, I'm over it. Forget it. I love it. It's a repeat of 2013 Super Bowl 47. I want to see it again in New Orleans.
If the power goes out again and we're up 30 points, something's up.
It's just recreating history. Vegas would have been so cool for them because that's like an iconic place. It's so different. It's so special. But at this point, New Orleans for the Super Bowl might just feel like home. So especially for Justin Tucker, especially for John Harbaugh, especially for a couple of those guys, everybody else might feel a little bit different, but they know that there is nostalgia there. And so I think that's what's going to get them there. And that's why they're making it to the Super Bowl. And hopefully history repeats itself and they win.
Absolutely. Now, we've gone by the time this ends, we're going to be going for 49 minutes. And if we really wanted to, we can go for another 49 minutes talking about these Baltimore sports teams. It is amazing. You talk about this and now, are they going to win the championships or not? We have a fun fall and we have a really fun summer. And I think that's really all you can ask for. And, obviously you, I'm sure, have a fun time covering it. Valerie Preactor, thank you so much for coming on the show today, breaking down these incredible Baltimore sports teams. And it was amazing to catch up.
You got it, Chase. Anytime. This is awesome.
This is really awesome. Thank you guys so much for listening. Alongside Valerie Preactor, I am Chase Coburn. We will see you next time. And go Flock and go Birdland.